Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Abhinav, or AB, and I head the Global Strategic Alliances at Trinka AI. And a very quick introduction for me. My work focuses on how institutions around the world are navigating the adoption of AI in academic and professional environments. And today's conversation goes right to the heart of that challenge. We are thrilled to have you here with us. But before we begin, I would like to share a few instructions on housekeeping. What I would request is please use the Q&A tab in Zoom to submit your questions. We'll get to as many as we can in our final segment. Please do use the chat for technical issues or to share resources with other attendees. And yes, this session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Trinka website after the event. Okay, so I am delighted to be joined here today by two colleagues whose work sits right at the center of everything that we'll be discussing today. First, Shelley Rodrigo. She is Senior Director of the Writing Programs and Professor in the Rhetoric, Composition, and Teaching of English program at the University of Arizona. Shelley's research examines how emerging technologies shape teaching and learning, and she has also co-authored the award-winning Teaching Literacy Online Guide. Besides that, she's also served as president of the National Council of Teachers of English in 2024. So she has been navigating these conversations at a national level. So Shelley, warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to add, I'm really excited to be here, and some current projects I'm working on, both on the local level in our program, the faculty's use of AI technologies, and we're in over a year now. And what's been fascinating about that is watching that shift as people have different experiences. But then I'm just as excited working with some of the folks that Tara works with on a reboot of a project that's known in writing studies called the Citation Project, but doing it in the age of AI, which does change things.
Interesting. And that brings me to our next panelist today, and that is Tara Radniecki. She is an associate dean of the University of Arizona Libraries. Tara leads cross-functional partnerships across the health sciences library, research engagement, and student learning and engagement. So before joining University of Arizona in 2023, she spent nearly a decade at the University of Nevada, Reno, directing research data services and the Delamere Science and Engineering Library. So Tara, warm welcome to you as well.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here and talk about some of the conversations that I think we're all having. And hopefully we can learn from all the attendees that are in this room too and walk away with some ideas on how to move forward. So thank you.
Great. So today's roundtable is brought to you by Trinka AI, which is developed by Inago, a global leader in scholarly editing and publication support with more than 2 decades of expertise. Trinka AI itself is recognized by Gartner as an emerging visionary in generative AI technologies, and we serve more than 200,000 users across 125 countries and 450 plus institutional customers worldwide. We have offices in 4 continents, and our mission is to support the responsible integration of AI in academic and professional environments. And one thing I'll mention very briefly right now, and I'll return to it probably at the end, and that is DocuMark, which is Trinka's latest solution for higher education. And unlike detection tools that scan a finished product, trying to guess whether AI was involved, DocuMark documents how the document was actually created in real time. Clients have found that the shift in approach can meaningfully reduce student anxiety about false AI accusations, a concern we know affects students well beyond the US. I'll share more, including some data at the end of our conversation. So, here's a quick look at probably what we'll be covering today. Three interconnected questions. First one being how writing is being impacted by AI, what information literacy looks like now in a post-AI environment, and how process transparency can support authentic learning. A quick note to our international attendees. Our panelists are based at the University of Arizona in the United States, and many examples will reflect the US context. But these questions are genuinely global, and we very much welcome perspectives from wherever you are joining us. So before we begin, a quick poll to understand the current landscape across the institutions represented today. We'd appreciate your responses to a quick poll on whether your institution currently stands, it's up on your screen, stands in its approach to AI in teaching, learning, and assessment. So quickly just share in your views while we start with our conversation today. So while you answer that, let's begin with what might seem like the most basic question, but I think it's actually the hardest one. A recent academic survey found that 95% of college students now use AI for writing tasks, including 94% for graded assessments. I mean, the numbers tell us that AI is omnipresent. But what do they actually mean for writing as a practice or as a cognitive activity and a pedagogical tool? Writing programs and academic libraries are both grappling with a similar challenge. They've long taught foundational skills, writing instructions, and bibliographical research that students can now very conveniently and partially hand off to AI. So let's start with that context. So, Shelley, can you unpack why writing assessments or assignments are essential and where generative AI complicates the picture? So, what is at stake? Oh, so we have the poll results here as well, and it's not very surprising. What do you think, Shelley and Tara? Do these results surprise you?
No. I mean,
Yeah.
all of these are concerns, right, across the board, and it kind of depends on where your institution is in the process and what maybe feels most immediate to you. But I think from probably Shelley and my perspective, we're probably echoing the two most popular votes here around helping students think critically and balancing academic integrity. I think is really in line with our work and our conversation. So.
Yes.
All right. So, Shelley, coming back to my question to you. So, what do you think is at stake when AI enters not just the drafting stage, but production and then reflection and revision?
Um, I'm going to start with the first half of that question that we had before the results popped up, so that why writing assignments are essential, and how generative AI complicates that. I think part of it is education has a long history of using writing in a variety of different ways. We write to learn. I mean, I even remember distinctly in elementary school, um, not only having to write words, vocabulary words, but then having to outline the shape of them as well. And that, right, that's a critical act of learning. But we know that, we ask students to write as a way to think through their connection to whatever it is they're learning. We also know that people write to do work, and that's both in school and outside of school. But what I think has got most people concerned, and that's why on that the answer with academic integrity is in education we write to assess, or we ask our students to write to assess, and uh, that obviously is where generative AI is complicating the picture, especially when a student is offloading the entire assignment to it, right? And so that, for obvious reasons, for very legitimate reasons, has people concerned. Um, but I think that now the second part of the question, kind of what's at stake when AI is not just here's the prompt, give me something, but it's potentially the whole way: drafting, process, production, reflection, and revision. Um, on the one hand, I'm hopeful with that because at least it breaks apart. It acknowledges that writing is a process, and for those of us who've been doing what we call in writing studies writing across the curriculum, where we're usually working more with faculty to help them develop more robust assignments, one of the first things we do is ask them to think of the assignment as something that's a process. And then all of a sudden, it has all of us thinking about generative AI at different points in that process. But then again, the obvious complications are that a lot of times in that process, and this is where I think get to pass off to Tara pretty quickly, is we're asking students to use writing to think, back to that, using writing to learn, using writing to think. And so helping both instructors and students think about, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And where is it important for my own thoughts, my own ideas, or that the fact that the writing was helping me figure out my own thoughts and my own ideas. Um, and so obviously that further complicates it. And then I'll just kind of end with, what I'm hopeful for is it's prompting both instructors and students to really think about, why are they writing, or even why are they in this class, which can also help instructors in terms of articulating, designing assignments, articulating the what, how, why these assignments are important. Because when we acknowledge that our students are also humans with lives outside of that class, it's not just that this writing thing is functioning as a test. It's this writing thing is one thing they have to do amongst a bunch of other stuff and make choices. Um, I think I'll stop there for now.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so, Tara, Shelley spoke about how AI is reshaping writing instructions. So, I'm curious to know that, are you seeing similar changes in how libraries teach research and information literacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the basis, right? The content of information literacy is changing at all, but the context in which we're teaching it, the systems in which we're teaching students to apply these sets of skills to is rapidly changing. Um, it's the first week of school here in Arizona, and it's our first freshman class that spent their entire high school careers with generative AI. So we have students coming in that are unlike any other students we've had before, and so as professionals, as instructors, our approach has to change. They're just coming in with a completely different skill set. And so again, it's not changing the content, but it's changing the context of it. And I'll I know we have a really international audience here. And so in the United States, the vast majority of academic libraries are utilizing the ACRL, Information Literacy Framework, from the Association of College and Research Libraries. And rather than kind of a checklist of research skills, that framework emphasizes how learners understand authority, the knowledge production process, inquiry, searching as inquiry, and participation in scholarly communities and conversation. And so in practice, information literacy really means that students can do more than locate sources. They can judge credibility and context. They can recognize any incentives or bias that might be influencing the creation of that knowledge. They can trace claims back to evidence, and they can use information responsibly and contribute their own informed work through writing or through other kind of knowledge object creation. And so I think it's really easy when we say all that out loud to see how applicable that is in the AI enabled educational landscape. And so it's from that foundation that university libraries at the University of Arizona, but across the board, especially in the United States, we're approaching AI. And we're all receiving more and more requests to go into the classroom and help instructors navigate and teach students what is AI, how do we use it responsibly. And so we're really doing that, utilizing our information literacy tools and framework. And then also in response to this question, I wanted to call out some interesting research around there. I think critical thinking and information literacy are often tied together. And critical thinking is a big term around AI use in education. How can we ensure that our students are still critically thinking when and developing those skills? Higher education is a time when we're really embedding those skills into our students. And like Shelley said, if you're learning through writing or we're learning through that engagement and that difficulty, right? The learning process, how can we ensure that's happening? And there's an interesting study that came out in 2025 that looked at over 500 college students. And the researchers were interested in kind of determining a few things around AI use. They wanted to know the cognitive offloading and just the cognitive load students were experiencing when using AI. But they were also interested in knowing how much critical thinking they were using when utilizing AI, and also if information literacy was a moderating factor. So really interesting. And what was interesting was that those students that had lower information literacy exhibited higher dependence on AI, less critical thinking, which isn't surprising. And those students who had higher information literacy skills at the outset utilized more critical thinking when using AI, which sounds great. And that's to me, that's a big supporter for teaching information literacy. There are some flip sides that we could talk about later that actually the cognitive load was higher for those students who exhibited critical thinking skills and had information literacy skills. So I think it's something we also have to be mindful when we're teaching these skills. We're actually creating a higher cognitive load for those students learning. Could lead to higher frustration, checking out sooner in the process. So it's just some interesting things out there when we're thinking about information literacy and critical thinking and how we're applying it to AI that might have implications that you're not always thinking about at the outset. I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. I mean, I have to admit that the first week where students are back on campus, there must be nervous and excitement, mixed and palpable uh, tension because of generative AI made available to everyone. So there is a certain level of learning, unlearning involved for everyone. But yes, excellent, very true. So we've started to understand what AI is doing to writing, but it's also reshaping what we mean by information literacy, like we just spoke about. So who is responsible for teaching it? I mean, generative AI creates a new urgency here because AI generated content can be hallucinated, it could be incorrect and biased in ways that require exactly the kind of critical thinking that information literacy education has always aimed to build. So, Tara, I'll start with you. In an AI-enabled world, what should information literacy education look like? And are our current approaches enough, or is it a time for a rethink?
That's a great question. And when I was thinking about it, librarians have always believed, right, that information literacy requires a scaffolded, contextually relevant approach to be successful. And anyways, in our field, there's an ongoing discourse around the value or limitations of what we call the one-shot library instruction session versus kind of an integrated programmatic approach. And in the one-shot model, which is really common, an instructor reaches out and says, I have an assignment, a research assignment that would really benefit from some library resources. But we know that that type of approach across a college campus, it results in inequities of what students are getting exposed to and what information literacy skills they're graduating with. Some disciplines are heavy users of kind of traditional library resources, and the nature of their work, especially if they're actually more writing based, tend to incorporate a lot of information literacy skills within their own discipline outside of the library. But we know there are other disciplines that traditionally work less with quote unquote information literacy kind of frameworks or concepts as kind of their own identity, the STEM fields. I am a STEM librarian my whole career. And so we can be concerned if we don't have a real programmatic scaffolded approach, that a lot of students won't be prepared for kind of that continuous learning, that career preparedness, and what we want in our students as informed citizens. I actually think so, kind of that setting the stage, we know we need a scaffolded approach. And I actually think that the current urgency around AI literacy and campuses really working towards creating institution-wide and scaffolded approaches, it's an excellent opportunity for libraries to also integrate those information literacy skills and expand what to utilize the opportunity and the platform there. Information literacy is AI literacy. It is a core component of it. So I think we've always wanted to do scaffolded approaches, and we've just had varying levels of success. So I would encourage libraries to utilize the current efforts and really make it clear. And I saw in the chat, I will definitely share a link to that article around the relationship between information literacy, critical thinking, and AI use, and why we need to be important players at that table and in creating those various curriculum.
Okay, perfect. So, Shelley, my next question is to you. And building on what Tara said, how do you see writing programs partnering with libraries to help students develop both research and writing skills in the AI era?
Well, I think first I just want to say that I feel fairly confident that my colleagues, fellow writing program administrators, that's what we tend to refer to them in the United States, usually have good relationships with their librarians, and they know, and we face the same problem with the idea of the one shot. I mean, the librarians have it hard because a lot of times it's one shot, one class period, whereas even we have, whether it's one writing course or a year of writing course, but it's still one shot, and students are in their programs, and they're in different contexts as they continue to grow as writers, and that's where some of the difficulty lies. And so in terms with writing programs, I think both working with the librarians in continuing to understand those scaffolding structures that Tara talked about in terms of how do we scaffold this. I also think even thinking pedagogically, zone of proximal development, recognizing that needing to design instruction on both information literacy and critical AI use in ways that are just at that threshold for students. And that's the struggle we have when we're as disciplines kind of dismissed as, here's your one shot, do this, and not, we will inoculate them and they will be good researchers, or we will inoculate them and they will be great writers. And we know both of these are deeply contextualized in every project. And so I think what is fascinating, because it is not new, is the same thing that both libraries and writing programs with writing across the curriculum initiatives has been doing. It's weirdly, it's the same work, right? It's working with the larger institution to acknowledge that if we want our students to be deep critical thinkers, to have sophisticated information literacy skills, and to continue to grow as writers throughout their time at the institution and beyond, we all have to work together. And that the problem is is that there's not one thing we can give our colleagues. It's all working together and trying to make the any given assignment, and again, even acknowledging or trying to figure out, is this a right to learn assignment, and helping faculty understand that, and then them to explain to students to understand that and help them understand, and this is why I don't want you to use generative AI in this assignment, because the point is for you to struggle through this. But I think that then beautifully goes back to that point that the research that Tara was sharing in, when we ask our students to do the hard work, to do the critical thinking, to do the deep reading into sources, that is a higher cognitive load. And we do also know, sorry, I don't have research specific to cite, but I do know that this is at least the case in the United States. We do know increasingly a larger population of our students is working, and whether it's working 20 hours a week or working 40 hours a week. And so they're making choices with their time, and we need to help, one, acknowledge that, design with it in mind, but then help students understand why we're asking them to make the choice to give some time to this assignment, to this thinking, to this heavy cognitive load, and that it's worth it. Yeah, good hard pedagogical stuff. And I think the fun thing is it reminds me of a conversation I had in January 2023. So right after ChatGPT broke out, and I had a conversation with a colleague who's also in computers and writing. That's our subfield, and we both kind of were like, yeah, it's. I mean, I'm not saying that working with generative AI isn't different, but it isn't different in the sense of this is another technology that is impacting how we teach, how students learn, how we assess. And we just need to critically engage with it like we have everything before, including the internet, Wikipedia, typewriters, pencils, erasers. Like these all impacted.
Absolutely, very true. So we've talked about policy, we've talked about pedagogy, but what about equity? How do we make sure AI doesn't widen existing gaps in access, digital literacy, or even fairness in assessment? So I leave it out to both of you.
I'll start, but Shelley has some great insights into this. This question, gosh, it's kind of overwhelming, right? And there's AI can cause inequities in so many different ways. And if we'll just focus, I guess, from the learning perspective, but we also know, and we're hearing concerns from our students around the inequities at just the physical processing of AI. And so I want to acknowledge that the environmental concerns around AI, how it's impacting communities in which these data centers are being built. And there's a whole other flip side to that. When I think about it within like the information literacy within the academic library context, of course, libraries are very concerned with equity when it comes to access to resources. It's one of the pillars on which our foundations are built. It is concerning. It can exacerbate already existing literacy gaps. It can cover up those gaps, and it makes it more difficult for those helpers, those of us who want to help students. It can make it harder to assess and identify those so that we can really bring them up to speed. I also will just call out one thing that I think isn't maybe talked about quite enough. I'm a little concerned about the cost cliff that must be coming around. We're in the cheap phase of AI. So nearly every institution in the United States has, as you know, we're a Gemini campus, some are ChatGPT. We all have some sort of institutional access, and we can all afford it right now. But at some point in time, the cost, these companies are spending a lot of money. They're going to need to recuperate costs. And I do have real equity concerns when we get to the point where not every institution is going to be able to afford to give their students access to these resources. They're going to experience very different learning experiences. And also when we think about career preparedness, it's going to exacerbate inequities there. So those are just kind of a couple of them. And we're already seeing that like in a very small scale within libraries. Right now, it costs extra to get the integrated AI features like within Scopus or EBSCO products or things like that. And some libraries may have the budget and some don't. And so their researchers and students are having a very different experience, could be positive or negative.
I first want to just agree, even on a personal level, the personal access. And again, interestingly though, it's not different. We already know that students with more access to resources, usually financial resources, if they wanted to cheat, had an easier time doing that, right? They had access to better papers, whatever you want to call it. So on the one hand, that is the same, and I think it's worth keeping that in mind. So in terms of that, the second highest was academic integrity issues, that in a lot of cases, the reasons students are cheating with generative AI have not changed, right? Actually, there's a study out of, and this I would, sorry, I don't have it offhand to drop in, but I'm happy to follow up with. There was a study out of Stanford with a group that had been doing research on cheating, and then very quickly, and their results were like, yeah, no, the reasons are the same. So I think that's something for us to keep in mind, right? It's just become easier, which again, I think goes back to time. But what I'd like to talk about in terms of inequity is very much our non-native English speaking students. Two major inequity issues. One, the that at least right now, AI plagiarism detectors tend to misidentify students who English is not their first language, their own writing as something that's AI generated. That over time that may or may not change, but right now that is happening. And that yeah, I was just in a meeting where an instructor is like, "Are we going to get one of these?" And internally, I'm going like, "I'm afraid. They're not. They're problematic." But also with that population, some of them are very actively seeking and wanting to use generative AI as something that helps them write more in standard academic English or standard American English or standard English, standardized English of some kind. And even just thinking about how LLMs work and how generative AI works and about that it is about the norm, I can at least appreciate that concern and potentially that desire when prior to generative AI had plenty of conversations with faculty who would get very agitated with their students who English was not their first language and can't they just clean up their writing? And so our English as additional language writers have always been fighting an uphill battle, and it's not going anywhere with generative AI. The inequities are still there, and yeah, so I'm just gonna say that is a part of my concern there too.
True, and that is a concern we have to address collectively as a group on how do we address this, because both your points are absolutely valid and on point, because the cost is going to show up sooner than later. And for those for whom English is a second language, this is always going to be a struggle. So very well said and fair points. So we've talked about how AI is reshaping writing and information literacy. Now we'd like to hear from all of you. What's the biggest challenge that's facing that you are facing right now? And that would essentially be our second poll. So feel free to select and choose your option with regards to this. And so thank you, everyone. It's interesting to see how many of you resonated with the first poll and shared your inputs over there. Uh, Whether it's designing authentic assessments or balancing academic integrity with responsible AI use, or perhaps helping students think more critically, there's a common thread running through all of these concerns. And they're asking us to look beyond the final piece of work and think much more carefully about how learning happens. And that would perfectly bring us to our next set of questions, which is around process transparency and academic integrity. So, if this poll is through, probably we could quickly see the results and then jump to our next set of questions. So, okay, so here are the responses for this. Interesting. In agreement or disagreement?
Agreed, right, Shelley? I think
Absolutely,
AI is
yeah.
widely used, and our institution is still figuring out how to respond. It's overall,
Right.
it's a moving target. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay. So now this is something I think both Shelley and Tara are already navigating in practice. Across higher education, we are seeing a significant shift away from evaluating finished products towards making the writing and research process itself more visible. I mean, this shift is driven partly by integrity concerns and partly by something more interesting, which is the growing recognition that authentic learning lives in the process and not the product. So there's also early evidence that when institutions approach this shift as a pedagogical opportunity rather than an enforcement mechanism, students respond very differently. So let's talk about what that looks like. So my question is for you, Shelley. We've talked about a lot about making the writing process more visible, but reflection is a skill in itself. So what challenges do you see in asking students to document that process? And where do you see the biggest opportunities?
Um, this is a great question. And back to that, these are questions, these are not new questions. Actually, research that I did pre-pandemic in prompting instructors across the disciplines to do more multimodal assignments, more multimedia, instead of assigning writing for thinking and or learning or assessment, to assign working with media in different ways. And one of the things that commonly occurred was like, I don't know how to grade this. And one of the common responses to that is, well, have the students also provide a reflection of what they did and why they did it. What was wonderful, it was a wonderful side effect of that research, is we realized that we would say reflection without articulating exactly what we meant, and people could do a bunch of different things. Reflection on process. What steps did you take? Why did you take those steps? Or what tools did you choose? Why did you choose? Reflections on content. Why did you include something, not include something? How did you organize it that way? Reflections on learning. What, at different points, what, all different reflection, all important reflection pieces. And interestingly, all of those are where we actually see the learning. So what I'm loving about the moment we're in right now is I feel like, especially in terms of writing and information literacy, we actually get to be more honest about what we're teaching. I would argue we're not teaching writing. We're teaching students frameworks and guidelines for how to navigate future writing situations we can't even imagine yet. And if we reframe it that way, it's all about the decision-making processes. And therefore, and Richard, I'm gonna, hopefully some of this is answering you. You put a question in there about your graduate course and designing assignments. Therefore, in designing assignments, I would argue we should be moving to where not only are we designing the assignments and able to articulate what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they're supposed to be learning, and breaking the assignment down into pieces that help them navigate it in various ways, but we should also be assigning along the whole way reflection pieces. So I already have a lot of faculty in my writing program who now kind of writing and learning journals are taking over as a predominant assessment piece, learning and assessment piece in the courses. And it's not just that it's there, but there's very specific assigned reflective prompts telling students, in this instance, I need you to reflect on this thing, and here's some example questions to work through. But this other instance, need you to reflect on other things. So back to the overarching question on reflection, yes, it is a skill. And it's also like information literacy, like writing. There's a bunch of different types of reflections, and we need to help our students understand which one we're looking for.
Right. So, Tara, let me bring you in on that. From the library perspective, what does process transparency look like in research? And what opportunities and challenges do you see for students?
Yeah, this is great. And actually, I want to echo Shelley's comment about this. This isn't new work, but I think it's new for some disciplines. My 10 years in Reno was all maker spaces. So I'm a STEM and makerspace librarian where we developed maker competencies that cannot be accessed by the thing you 3D print, right? It's about the process. And so it's really like I would encourage folks, if you're interested in different assessment methods, to really look at those experiential learning disciplines and just methodologies and pedagogies around specifically experiential learning. It's a very reflective process that Shelley is talking about. And AI is just expanding. It's a wonderful process. It's a little bit more time intensive and things like that, but there are already known kind of pedagogies and assessment methods around experiential learning that I think will be really applicable even in these non-traditional experiential learning sort of environments. As far as research goes, I think it's an interesting time. I don't know if we have any colleagues from Norway in the room, the virtual room, but I recently saw an article that talked about, I believe it's the National Library of Norway. It kind of collates and tracks statistics for all of its libraries, including academic institutions. And full text access to articles was down 17% in Norway. And so there's some conjecture, right, about, oh no, are we educating the first cohort of students that is citing research and researchers that is citing research that they haven't read the full text of? It's not conclusive, right? But there are some warning signs. Counter, which is an international organization, right, that every librarian knows because of counter statistics. They've kind of put out some suggestions around if your counter stats look off, it might not be the stats, right? Like it's probably like think about AI use. How is it being used at your institution? So I think that's really fascinating to put in context that even the academic generative AI systems like Perplexity that offer citations and things like that, it's still causing these shortcuts that might be kind of circuiting the research process. It calls into question, we've already seen, if you kind of look in the popular literature, like the Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed, I've seen some discussions around literature reviews in faculty level research and how clearly some of them are being generated by AI. There's kind of a pattern where AI cites the seminal piece and then it skips all the middle and it kind of goes to the end, right? So we're seeing some concerns there when we think about like, okay, this is probably fine the first year, but if this is kind of a long-term practice, I think it has to call into question how we can continue building off research if we're not deeply engaging with that original research that we're building off of. So I do think like the documenting, it's not even so much the documenting, but ensuring that the actual processes that we should be documenting are still happening. I'll also kind of throw out there, I saw like some embedded librarianship questions, which makes me think of health sciences, which I also work with, and how AI is becoming prevalent in systematic reviews, which is a traditionally very rigid documented search process. And so it's pretty interesting to think about both the capabilities that it can do as far as meta-analysis and helping us find all the pertinent research, but the impacts it has on already kind of troubling reproducibility issues that we have in various branches of science. It is something we have to be aware of. And as a shout out, I don't know if we have any Waterloo colleagues, but I love, again, talking about documentation and AI transparency. There's an AI disclosure framework called the AID framework from the University of Waterloo. It's a great tool. So we are moving, as scholarly communities towards disclosing our AI use. And so that's a wonderful framework that I know is being adopted at several institutions. Because I do think we've kind of been getting around this, like, yes, we want you to document your use of AI. We say that. And then we also know there's some negative connotations if you admit to using AI. And so like, even as a professional, do I want to use AI because I'm going to have to disclose it? And then will people judge me because I used AI to help me? Right? We're having all these sorts of conversations. So yes, we can say like, you need to document your process. It's important to document the learning and things like that. But I think there's larger kind of like contextual, social issues around that documenting doesn't necessarily get at the heart of it. There's also some research, I'll try to find it. I don't know if it was Pew or another organization like Pew, where, like you said, an astronomical percentage of students are using it, but a very high percentage of those students don't trust it, don't like using it, but they kind of feel compelled to use it. And so again, all these kind of issues are interconnected when we talk about documenting it and process transparency, I think.
So great points, Tara. I mean, the real threat is superficial learning. And because if you've not read through the actual research and you're still citing it and just giving it as a reference, it defeats the whole purpose of you doing that work. And like I sometimes like to say, we want our students and children to remain smart in the absence of a device and electricity. I mean, they should be able to do that. And Shelley, I mean, fantastic insights on the research that you have done. Absolutely interesting. And I think everyone on this panel would like to go through some of the insights that you have and the findings and learnings from that research. So that is remarkable. So with that, I think we have about roughly 12 or 13 minutes left in this session, and I want to use them well. So before we open the floor for questions, I'd like to quickly talk about DocuMark and also share two important and relevant resources with everyone present here on this session today. So first and foremost, DocuMark. So much of what Shelley and Tara have described today, from the shift from the product to the process, the importance of making thinking visible, the need to support students rather than police them, points towards a fundamental redesign of how we approach writing and the learning process. And Trinka AI has created this tool grounded in exactly those principles, where DocuMark makes the learning and writing process visible for both students and instructors alike as it's happening. So the question that it is designed to answer is, what if you could see how your students learn to write and not just what they submit? I'll quickly play a small video for you that will give you a quick overview of DocuMark.
What if you never had to verify AI content of your students again? Teachers around the world are abandoning AI detection tools for DocuMark, a revolutionary tool that relieves faculty stress, guides students to use AI responsibly, and upholds academic integrity. Trinka shifts the focus back to what matters: learning, no more detective work. DocuMark frees Evaluator from the stress of AI detection, guides students to take ownership of their AI use, and provides institutions with clear data and insights to reinforce institutions' AI policies. DocuMark works in the background classifying text as it is typed or pasted and guiding students to verify AI-generated texts before submitting, turning AI into a learning companion, not a shortcut. Educators receive an analytics and verification report, can review the writing process, and decide whether to accept the submission or request revisions. Educators can then define the AI usage policy and the acceptable percentage for quick decision-making. No extra steps, no guesswork, just verified writing and smarter learning. To get started, email us at connect@trinka.ai.
Right, so that was a quick overview on DocuMark. And we also have some interesting findings at Oklahoma State University around student anxiety about false AI accusations, which fell by about 37.5 percentage points while using DocuMark. So this in itself is a significant finding because it speaks directly to what our panelists described about the pressures students face. And it suggests that process transparency, when framed as a support rather than surveillance, changes how students experience academic integrity. This case study is something that we'll be happy to share with everyone as well. It's there on our website as well. So please feel free to visit and download this case study in detail. What I'd like to share with you, I discussed earlier and spoke about also, is sharing some resources with you. So the first resource is something Trinka AI has just launched, which is the University AI Policy Repository, available at trinka.ai. And one of the most consistent things we hear from faculty and administrators is that they feel like they're building AI policies from scratch, when in fact, dozens of institutions have already done this work. So this repository collects publicly available AI policies from universities across the US in one searchable place. So you can see how peer institutions are approaching everything from syllabus, language to institutional governance. All details are available here. So if you're in the early stages of policy development or making the case to leadership that your current approach needs updating, this is a practical place to start. So the link is going to be in the chat, so feel free to look it up and check out the AI policies. The second resource that I just wanted to very quickly share with all of you is something that ties directly into what we are discussing, called the Evolving Landscape of Academic Integrity in Higher Education. It covers exactly this tension, which is AI misuse on one side and how institutions are actually transforming their pedagogy and assessments in response with real strategies and not just problem statements. So it's on your screen. Just scan the QR code to have a look after this session. And if DocuMark sounds like something worth exploring at your institution, then we'd love to connect. We offer custom demos tailored to your institutional context. And our team spans 10 countries and 4 continents. So wherever you are joining us from today, we can support you. So you can just scan the QR code on your screen or just visit Trinka.ai. This is the QR code. Just feel free to scan this. And let's quickly jump right back into the poll. And this is something for you. If you're interested in scheduling a demo for DocuMark, feel free to answer this. And let's quickly now jump to some of the questions that we have today. Let me see. So I'll ask Tara or Shelley, have you had a chance to go through some of the questions, and would you like to take one, or should I check and see one. Okay.
I see the first question. I was typing out an answer, so I can just quickly say it. So it's we all believe the library can provide direction, but faculty and admin don't see us as offering much help in AI. On the other side, do I want to add to my load? Those are great questions. Should librarians wait and use a top-down influence or use a grassroots approach? I'll just tell you at UA, it started as a grassroots approach. We had one librarian who was very interested in ChatGPT when it was launched in 2023. She worked with one other colleague that created the first tutorials available on campus. And so the library, which instructors found and embedded into their courses, which was wonderful. However, we didn't have capacity beyond that. And so it has been something we've really grappled with around upskilling all of our librarians and really honoring current workloads, but also pivoting in ways that our campus needs. And then understanding AI literacy as just an extension of information literacy. And again, providing opportunities to upskill. I'll say now at this point, it's not more, but it's probably equal grassroots and a hybrid. The libraries is launching our AI studio on our own in October for undergrad students. We offer a wide variety of researcher geared workshops around AI from our data cooperative unit. But we're also recognized as leaders, and so we're at that high level conversation. So as an associate dean, I'm a co-lead with peers from our technology teaching and assessment department on campus around some provost set goals. So those are kind of the big goals. So I would say it started grassroots, and then campus became aware that we had this expertise and that we were willing to work with it. I'll also do a shout out. Just remind, libraries are really good at providing services and information resources. So even if you might not have the in-house expertise around some of this AI, remember what you do have to offer. We're great at making tutorials. We have lots of pedagogical knowledge, and we know how to provide access to different types of resources. So you can always leverage that too.
Great. So, Shelley, would you like to take this question?
Sure. I'd like to run a little bit with Richard's more specifically. So Richard specifically asked that it's a graduate writing for policymaking course, and he's already broken down the writing assignments and is less concerned about necessarily catching inappropriate AI use. Yeah, we don't have time for policing, right? But more concerned about helping students define areas for appropriate AI use. And I think that's when having a framework as an instructor to be and to help students process it. So both as you design and then process, for each step of the way. So thinking of each of those process steps as separate assignments and thinking, is it allowed? So from your perspective, is it allowed? And when you answer that question, part of what you're suggesting is why are you not? So helping students understand. And I think this is the interesting part. A lot of times we have instructors that some final big piece is an assessment piece, but all the process work is learning pieces. And so making that more clear to students, having them understand that, hey, at this point, the point is for you to be figuring out what you think you know or what you want to know. And that's why I'm saying this is not appropriate. Or that's why I'm asking you to not only think about the topic, but connect it to your own experiences and expectations as a way to make it your own. So Richard, I mean, I hate looking at you going like more work for you, but helping them to understand what they're doing in that moment and why they're doing it will help both you and them articulate why or why not AI is appropriate.
Great. So thank you so much. And before we sign off, Shelley, Tara, any final thoughts you'd like to leave attendees with?
I think from a library perspective, there's so much thoughtful work being done. There's also there's a lot of we know there's excitement about the possibilities of AI. There's a lot of fear. I would encourage the way we've been talking about it here and other places and in our larger library communities is just around moving forward and doing something. Perfection is right the enemy of good. And so nobody's going to have the answers. We're not going to figure this out perfectly, but we need to move forward and address it and never underestimate the role that you can play in this. We bring expertise just because you might not understand exactly how a RAG model works doesn't mean you don't have meaningful pedagogical or methodological contributions to make to the conversation at your institutions.
And I'm going to say keep talking, because both the technologies and your experiences with it, and as Tara reminded us, our students' experience with it is constantly changing. And so instead of I doubt most of us have that moment of I know it all, but just keep talking, because it's as we continue to dialogue with each other, we're figuring out where we're currently landing, what we currently want to do, and then check back in with one another at a future and see how it's shifting.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley and Tara. It's been an absolute pleasure and joy to have you here. And this conversation has been exactly what we hoped it would be. Writing and information literacy are not peripheral to the AI and higher education question, they are central to it. And what Shelley and Tara are doing at the University of Arizona, that is thinking carefully, collaborating across institutional boundaries, and holding on to the purpose of writing and research, even as the tools change around them, is a model worth watching. So thank you everyone for joining us today from across the US and around the world. The recording will be available on the Trinka website shortly, and all resources mentioned today, the policy repository, the white paper, DocuMark, all will be made available to you in the chat. So we hope to see you at the next event. And Tara and Shelley, it's been an absolute joy and my privilege and pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.